We've got firewood everywhere at the minute. It's here, 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 here. But our main problem is that it's infiltrated our entrance hall. And right opposite our wood stove, we've got this big empty corner in the living room that we've never really known what to do with because it sits behind the door. So I think by now you probably know where this is going. Let's build a cabinet. And I've got here some 18mm MDF. But it's not just any old MDF. This is Medite Optima. It's a specially engineered moisture resistant board with an extra smooth surface which offers enhanced machinability due to its higher density core. So great for when cutting things like edge profiles, rebates or housing grooves. And I'd like to thank Medite SMARTPLY, who this video is in paid partnership with. If you'd like to find out more about the product, get access to exclusive content, prize draws and a free gift when signing up, you can check out the members area at meditemakesitreal.com. There'll be a link in the description box below. I don't want my cabinet to look like a piece of flat packed furniture, so for this project I'm going to do 6 things that will make this cabinet something different, less boring. And the first of those 5 things is adding some shape to the side panels. I'm going for a tapered shape here so that it's deeper at the bottom and narrower at the top. So after lots of measuring and marking, I'm ready to cut the side panels. I placed them together just to check that they are identical, and this was good enough for me, so now I can cut some shelves. The second thing I'm going to do to make this cabinet less boring is to add some salvaged hardwood accents. I want to add some slatted open shelving to the cabinet. This wood came from some old wardrobe door frames that I ripped out of our bathroom a few years ago, and using salvaged wood is what my channel is all about. After milling these into consistent sized slats, I noticed there were quite a few different species of timber here. Originally these had all been stained to make them look alike, so I'm going to have to be a bit selective here to pick some pieces that look similar, because I won't be applying a stain. I also need to be selective in which lengths I use because I want to cut away all of the dowel and nail holes. I'm going to fit my 6mm flat grind grooving blade in the table saw next so that I can cut some rebates onto the ends of the slats. And I marked where I need to cut the joinery using a knife, which I can line up with my table saw blade. And then I'm chamfering the edges. And I can start gluing these slatted shelves together. All 3 of the shelves are going to need to be slightly different in depth due to the tapered shape of the cabinet. So the bottom shelf will have 8 slats, the middle 7 and the top 6. A wet toothbrush came in handy for removing the excess glue. And it's a good job I have lots of clamps because I really didn't want to use nails here. Now I can start marking up for the joinery. I'm going to be using dominoes, and at the top where the tapers are, I can reference from the back edge of the side panels to ensure that all of my shelves will be square to the back. I just made the classic Festool domino mistake and I forgot to reset my plunge depth, so I'm going to have to fill this hole now. Luckily though, it'll be behind a door, so I'm not too worried about it. A small piece of domino fills most of the void, so that gets glued in place. And then I can add filler and sand away the excess once dry. And once this is painted, it should be invisible. To make my glue ups less stressful, I like to do this in 2 stages. I glue in one side of the dominoes first and wait for that to dry before tackling the main assembly later. This is also a good opportunity to add primer and paint to the inside faces of the unit, as I'll be able to get a better finish now rather than once it's assembled. The paint I'm using here is the same emulsion used on the walls of the room where this cabinet will be. The paint has a silk finish, so it's pretty durable on its own, so I don't have any concerns about it, but adding varnish over the paint to protect it certainly would be an option. And while I wait for the paint to dry, I can also get a coat of tung oil on the slatted shelves. I chose tung oil because it's going to darken and amber this hardwood and make it look beautiful once it's all dry. I accidentally got quite a lot of paint on the dominoes that I added earlier, so I'm scraping the worst of it away for better adhesion, and then I can start gluing and assembling. I'm adding a big roundover to the outside edges of the unit. And here's a close look at how smooth the edges of this MDF are once machined, much less fluffy than regular MDF. Just a light bit of sanding needed and then it's ready for primer and paint. I then flipped the unit over so that I could cut a rebate to the back of what will be the cabinet areas of the unit at the top and the bottom. And I have some 6mm MR MDF that I can use for the back panels. I just need to chisel the corners square. The third thing that I'm going to be doing to make this MDF cabinet more interesting is to add a leg frame, and I'll need some chunky hardwood to make the legs. This piece that came from an old door frame happened to be long enough so that I can get 4 legs out of it. And using more of the slats that I milled up earlier, I can use these as apron rails between the legs to keep the legs rigid and strong. I'm going to add a taper to the legs to make them look more elegant. And I added a roundover at the router table. The fourth thing I'll be doing to make this more interesting is making some panelled cabinet doors using some of the narrow offcuts of the MDF. Not only is this a great way to use up what could be considered scrap materials, but it's also going to be another feature. Much like the cabinet carcass itself, these doors are going to have a roundover on the outside edges and a rebate on the inside, and this was some very dusty work. I also get the outside of the cabinet primed, denibbed and then painted. Next I'm going to fit the leg frame, so I'm drilling some pilot holes which I want to countersink so that the screws are hidden, and then a bit of glue and I can get it secured to the bottom of the cabinet. Back to the cabinet doors again now, and I cut some 6mm panels to fit inside the rebates. And now for probably the most wacky idea out of all of them. I have some of this fake leather left over from when I made a rocking chair a few years back, and I had the idea of using this for the panels on the cabinet doors. It was a bit crumpled from where it had been stored away in a drawer though, so I had to get the iron out, which is a very rare occurrence. So this is the fifth thing that I did to make the cabinet more interesting, and to be honest, I went back and forth on whether this was a good idea or not, but I decided that the only way of finding out if I liked it or not was to actually make it. I used spray adhesive to stick the leather to the MDF, and then I can trim away the excess. And then I ran a bead of super glue around the inside of the rebate and popped the panels in place. Now I can get the top door offered up, and as you'll see, I left a 2mm gap around all 4 edges of the door to allow for it to open and close. And positioning it like this with some shims around it allows me to get it right where I want it to be when the door is closed. And then from the inside I can check it's square. The 6th thing that will make this cabinet more interesting is using some of these spring hinges, which I actually ordered for another project that never came to fruition. Not the most elegant hinges, I know, but I thought it'd be interesting to have a door that opened vertically for the top cabinet. These didn't come with any fitting instructions, so I'm just going to leave a clearance gap of about 10mm at the top, fit them in place, and hope for the best. If the door didn't open, then at least I'd be able to see where I went wrong and reposition the hinges if necessary. Fortunately though, they worked great. I also have some of these black handles left over from when I made a cot a few months ago, and I think these will complement the leather panels. I couldn't yet fit the door for the bottom cabinet as the hinges hadn't arrived in time, but I decided to bring the cabinet in and I can add the extra door another day. Mickey did some investigating before descending very ungracefully, and Hazel watched on from a distance. You might remember from earlier that I made 3 of these slatted shelves and only fitted 2 of them. That's because the 3rd one was designed just to sit on top of the bottom MDF cabinet like this. Then I can get the unit filled with firewood. And the reason for this top cabinet is because we wanted somewhere safe to put our blowtorch, safely stored away from baby Brown, who will be crawling around and walking in the not too distant future. A couple of days later, those pesky hinges arrived. I measure in 22.5mm to drill out the centre using a 35mm Forstner bit. And these are inset hinges, meaning the door sits inside the cabinet rather than the more common overlay type. They just needed a bit of adjustment to get the gaps around the door nice and consistent. And I found one of these magnetic stops in a drawer in my workshop, which I could use for the door to close onto. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this project, particularly whether you like the addition of the leather. And I'd like to thank Medite SMARTPLY for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching.